Welcome to the Writer Reads A Planet's Ransom, Book 1 of the Ransomeers. Today's chapter is Chapter 9, Training Resumes. It took 3 attempts to get through the quiz, and by then I was more than ready for bed. That night I stared out into the darkness, watching the trees moving in the breeze. I was really looking forward to getting out the next day. I missed the feel of the wind on my skin. I was up while the morning light was still grey, glancing south and east to catch the first colour of sunrise as I dressed. I had planned on putting on my slippers and wearing them until it was time to leave, but the computer stopped me. "Those will not be appropriate footwear for today," it said. I know I was only going to wear them until it was time to leave. "Please put on the appropriate footwear for the day." I sighed. I thought about arguing with it, I really did. But I learnt that it would do me no good. Arguing only made everything take twice as long as it should. I put the slippers to one side and picked up the boots and a pair of socks. Breakfast appeared as soon as the last lace had been tied. I took my food and sat on the end of the bed in front of the screens. "What are you doing?" the computer asked. "Reviewing today's assignments," I told it. I was feeling slightly puzzled. I'd thought what I was doing was obvious. "Continue." Even for a machine it sounded impatient. I still had the cooking fire for survival. It was very hard to dig a fire pit and light a fire when you couldn't get outside. I decided I'd also look for a suitable spot to put my shelter, and then maybe I'd look for a smaller tree so I could gather the sap I'd need for a bird trap. Taking the time to look outside at lunchtimes had really paid off. I'd identified 3 species of bird that might be edible, if I could catch them. Once I had the sap, I could work on finding where they roosted so I could trap them. That would take me past Survival 3. I also needed to decide on a safe place for quarantine. That task was no longer a joke, not with tremolers on the loose. Which reminded me. How did Alicia come down with tremolers? "Have you finished reviewing today's tasking?" the computer responded. "Not yet." "You have 10 more minutes." And then I knew something was up. The computer shouldn't be in a hurry. That was a human trait, or the trait of something with sentience, not a computer with basic interaction intelligence. I thought about pushing the topic, but decided against it. I'd push it a bit more when I was ready to leave. The exploration task had advanced to circumnavigate the area up to 1 mile out from the pod, find a permanent water source and map it, that kind of thing. There was nothing more in security, but I still had a couple of days revising the protocols I'd learned so far. No doubt the computer would add a few more when it was ready, and the medical and emergency levels were frozen until I found the right cache, which reminded me of 2 things. "Has the level 6 med box been dropped yet?" "Affirmative." "Where?" The drop was as close to Alicia's pod as possible. "Her pod has quarantine flags on it, hasn't it?" "Negative. Alicia had no time between diagnosis and collapse." "Then how did you get her into stasis?" "We triggered pod conversion." You turned her whole pod into a stasis chamber?" "Affirmative." "With no warnings?" "Negative." "But you said there were no flags." "There is an audio warning that will trigger on proximity." "Do the others know?" "We enforced advanced medical training on everyone." "And emergency training?" "Only you have encountered thorn scorpions." "Surely there are other dangers that need it." "Negative." "What if one of them falls or injures themselves away from their pods?" "They will need to return in order for the program to trigger." Part of me went numb. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but the computer chimed and the training screens went blank. "It is time for you to recommence basic training." There was a thump in the drawer I had decided to call the dispensary. I opened it and pulled out my pack. It was a lot heavier than the last time I'd picked it up. "What did you put in it this time?" I asked. "You have the necessary equipment and enough rations for 3 nights outside the pod." "But I'll be coming back tonight." "That is possible." I looked around the pod, glancing toward the screens. "But how will I be able to track my progress?" "There is a portable workstation in your pack." Something was definitely wrong. Very wrong, if the machine's next response was anything to go by. Please put on the GGS. Audio has now been activated." Audio? We will be able to communicate at a distance. But why? That will be explained as necessary. It is time for you to continue your tasks. I opened my mouth to ask it what was going on, but it chimed again. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought it was a demand I listen. When it spoke, I could hear its voice in the GGS headset. It is imperative you remember that you and the others dropped are the only sentients on this world. There are no other races authorized. Are you saying there are unauthorized races present? That will be explained when necessary. Please leave the pod now. The lights inside the pod flashed red. Pod open. It came out short and sharp, but the light stopped flashing, and I felt the wind against my skin. I decided I'd find a suitable site for the shelter building task, that it would be a good idea to make it not far from the quarantine site, and that only then would I build the cooking fire. I did not want to spend the night outside the pod. I still did not know what those shadows on the lower slope had been, but the computer was acting very strangely, and I didn't know if it would let me back inside. When I returned, with thoughts of the shadows dancing in my head, I turned and worked my way uphill. I was hoping to find something suitable just below the crest of the hill I'd found the same day I'd found the thorn scorpions. Which reminded me, I wanted something a good distance away from those scorpions. I took the time to study the map inside the GGS visor I had pulled down across my eyes. The contour lines, those lines that drew close together when the ground was steep and grew further apart as the slope decreased. The contour lines showed what might be a flat area at the base of a cliff, and I was hoping it was an area free of thorn trees. I made my way to the patch of thorn trees and vuran bushes I'd found on my first trip out, and then skirted around it until I found the ridge line again. I decided I'd follow it along until I reached the cliff. Part of the survival tutorial had included what to look for in stable ground. I didn't want to build my shelter under a sandstone overhang, for instance, or at the base of a cliff of slidge rock, which was liable to dissolve in heavy rain. I trekked along the ridge, keeping a close eye on the sun as I moved. I didn't want to be more than 4 estimated hours away from the pod, and the cliff I was aiming for was at my outer limit. If there were any major obstacles on a direct route between the cliff and the pod, I'd either be spending the night outside or returning in the dark. To my relief, the cliff was neither slidge rock nor sandstone, but an upthrust of sapphirite. Cool, I thought, remembering sapphirite was a mineable stone, but only if you had laser or high-frequency cutters, and it was worth a lot of credits. I figured I'd stake my claim right now, provided the ground at the cliff base was suitable for camping. The Tamska trees had given way to stuntier versions of themselves, mixed with equally blunted ghost pines and red-skinned corkies. I liked the corkies for 2 reasons. The first one being they provided a soft timber which was easy to carve, but which hardened when soaked in a solution of chlorine and fluorite. Of course, I'd have to find those, but the trees were a start, and I made a note to mark them on the map. This area was just looking better and better for permanent settlement, and I didn't know whether to be happy or disappointed. I moved off the ridgeline, skirting the base of sapphirite boulders as I worked my way downward. The trees grew a little taller as the ridge rose above them, sheltering them from the weather. Prevailing winds, I said, and the visor showed which way the strongest winds blew. Storm patterns, I demanded, pushing the system a little further. Insufficient data. I jumped at the sound of the computer's voice in my ear, and then remembered. Audio. I reached an outcrop with a view through the trees, and again the computer's unexpected instruction sounded in my ear. Stop. Scan. Scan? Okay. I chose a point to the left of the gap between the trees, and then slowly moved my head, making sure to cover the whole of the view. Scan again. Higher resolution, the computer ordered. I did as it directed, zooming in until I heard resolution sufficient in my ear. I wasn't surprised to hear the order a 3rd and 4th time, each accompanied by a higher focus. Data sufficient, the computer said at the end of the 4th scan, and the GGS dialed itself back to the normal resolution. I took one last look out between the trees and then resumed my journey down the hill. I'd noticed nothing in any of the scans to justify the computer's demands, but they puzzled me. The sapphirite took on a deeper colour the further down the cliff I got, and I noticed that other rocks littered the hillside as though they'd been pushed out of the way as the sapphirite made its way to the surface. I recognized none of them, but took careful pictures of every one. Maybe some of them would be useful later on. I was particularly intrigued by protrusions of a strange marble-like rock blended with hard, granular streaks, but a glance at the sky told me I was running out of time. It took me 2 hours to work my way down from the ridge line to the flatter ground at the cliff base. I kept an eye out for thorn trees, but was very relieved when I found none. Bushes with soft grey foliage let off a spicy scent as I brushed past them. I made sure to take a few close-ups of the leaves and small buds clustered amongst them, and noted the soft, fluffy greenery that grew beneath them. Both bushes and trees grew up to the cliff base, concealing a small stream that sprang from its base. "Well, that spoils that idea," I said, remembering the computer's strict instructions that no dwelling should be built within 100 meters of a water source. "Negative." Again the computer interrupted, and I looked at the contour map once more. It was, of course, right. The ground rose in a series of stepped platforms running parallel to the ridge line, and for a little way along the river's banks. I chose one 150 feet from the cliff base and 30 feet above the stream. I could build a shelter amongst the ghost pines and leopard vesk. Neither species shed their branches, and both were deep-rooted. The database said so. "Here," I said, when I reached the spot I'd chosen, and the computer chimed in my ear. "Affirmative." Now all I had to do was find a path back to the pod. I studied the contour map, noting that the little stream seemed to flow to the north of the pod. I also remembered the exploration task that required a river to be mapped from its source to where it joined a larger body of water, and I was pretty sure there was a bigger river at the bottom of the steep slope near the pod. Looking at my map, I was also fairly certain it wouldn't take me long to reach the pod and home. I was nearly right. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's reading, please hit like. If you'd like to hear more, please hit subscribe. I'll check you later. Take care out there.